Hello, and welcome to Question and Answer Time number 9. I'm your host, Adam Neely. It rhymes this time, so you know it's going to be a good time. I'm answering all of your questions about bass and music in general, and also a lot of stuff about tab, because that last video got a lot of questions, so here we go. Question and Answer Time with
Dave Mustaine uses tabs. Is he not a professional?
Of course he's a professional. I don't mean to imply that anybody who just uses tablature isn't a professional, but the thing that you have to understand here, and everybody has to understand, is that there's more than one sort of shade of professional musician, and the way that a lot of people view professional musician is colored through the lens of famous musicians, or musicians that you might have heard of or know. Maybe you know of anywhere between 200 to 300 musicians, or have heard of them. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of other people who are making a living and living comfortably, not starving, as musicians around the world. And how do they do that? Well, they're able to do that because of a degree of skill in a bunch of different things. Like maybe they're a really good sight readers, or maybe they're an amazing, salsa musician. And the more of these skills that you can acquire, the ability to read, the ability to know theory, and also the ability to be able to play a bunch of different kinds of music, greatly increases your ability to make music as a living, not have to worry about a day job, not have to worry about, doing things that you might not like in order to support your music. You get to play music all the time. That's awesome. That's what I do, and that's what I want to encourage people who really like music and really like this sort of thing to do also. Not to say that having a day job and then playing music on the side is bad, and that's what most people do, honestly, but there is another side of this. There is another side of you don't have to be famous to become a professional musician.
I don't think this is a good argument for why you shouldn't use tablature. It's a great argument for why you should use music notation. Most people who prefer tablature are people who don't know how to read notation. So the task then is not to convince notation readers to keep reading notation. The task is encouraging tab readers to learn notation and begin reading it. You made your points very well, but I think the way you position your argument is a little flawed.
So if you notice from the content of the video itself, I don't really spend much time arguing against tablature. And a lot of people seem to misunderstand my point, and I totally understand why that is. It's because I named it Why You Shouldn't Use Tab. And I purely named it that so people would click on it, because this is the internet, and the internet is super saturated with content, and I need to get eyeballs on my content. And it worked. Now, it does make me feel a little bit dirty, but if I did name it something, like the relationship of saccadic eye movement to standard notation, that's a little bit drier, it's a little truer to, the thesis of my video, but it doesn't really drive traffic. I myself used tablature all the time when I was first starting out. Go on MX tabs, learn my Green Day, learn my Rage Against the Machine, my Korn, my Linkin Park, all that good, angry white boy 90s alternative new metal stuff. That was my jam. Yeah, and it's great way of learning. And that's the point of tablature, is to learn. It is so good for that because it's so easy. You're able to, get excited about the music that you're reading. And it takes a while to be able to get to the point where you can read standard notation fluently, and that, turns a lot of people off. That's why I use tablature in my own teaching very, very frequently. But, there is a point where standard notation takes over and becomes just the better option between the two. It's the more advanced option, it's the more intense option, it's the more rewarding option. After a while, it does take a while to get to that point.
Are you doing a PhD about musicians in general? You should. You'll be a reference for a lot of people.
You're not the first person to bring up the idea of a PhD to me. I am going to get a doctoral degree in music, but it's probably going to be a DMA, which is a more performance and composition-based doctoral degree. A PhD is a little bit more research-based. So if I was studying musicology, or if I was studying some intense music theory, I might do that. But at heart, even though I like talking eloquently about musical subjects and theory and whatnot, at heart I'm just a dumb bass player. I just like playing bass, or I just like writing music. I just like writing cool music that I like. So I might not go that deep into the research aspect of it, but who knows?
Far and few between. Lol. Also, I'm thinking about going to Berkeley, but I'm not sure if the price is worth it. Do you think it's worth it? If not, any other schools in specific that are cheaper that you could recommend?
That's an interesting question, because honestly, private universities and private music schools in the United States are, way overpriced. It only gets you a bachelor's of music degree, which doesn't really do anything, doesn't get you any better jobs or anything. The only reason why I was able to go to Berkeley is because I graduated in 2.5 years. I aggressively sought out scholarship, and my parents were able to help me. Now, whether or not it's worth it for the full 4-year tuition, that's an interesting question, because I'll say yes and no. No, because just gives you a bachelor's of music degree. But in terms of your development as a human being, it can be quite valuable to go to someplace like Berkeley. When you're coming from any other place in the United States or the world to a place like Berkeley, you normally are coming from a place of ego. You are a big fish in a small pond, generally. You are an amazing musician in your hometown, in your home territory, in your home turf. But when you go to Berkeley, you are nothing, because you have bass players there that are way better than you, have been playing way longer, and that's crushing your ego, because you're like, oh my God, my entire self-worth, my entire being was based upon the fact that I was an amazing musician. Now I'm here and that I'm not an amazing musician in this context. What am I going to do? And it's great for personal growth, because that point where you crush your ego, you lose the ego, and then you build back up who you are as a musician and who you are as a human being, away from being the best at something, just being you. That's important. Berkeley can be very good for that, because there's so many people who go there and so many people who are amazing. Going to school in a place like New York City can do the same exact thing. You want to crush your ego. It seems like kind of a weird thing to say, but you got to lose your ego, and going to a Berkeley is a great place for that. Also, the amazing classes, the amazing ensembles, all the extracurricular activities, all that stuff, that's all great. But that, I think, is the core nugget of truth in what you need to do as a musician if you go to Berkeley.
Hi Adam, longtime viewer, first-time commenter. I've been playing guitar and bass for a long time, but never learned how to read standard notation. I'm familiar with notes, chords, scales, rhythm, time signatures, subdivisions, etc., but I find it difficult after playing blind for so long to relate these concepts to the symbols on the page. I'm sure I'm not the first, and it would be nice to expand what I know and round out more as an artist. My question is, how would you recommend going about learning notation as an experienced but illiterate musician? Are there guides or methods you think would be particularly effective or engaging?
The most effective way of learning how to read is to read a lot. The question then becomes, where do you get all this music to read? Well, a great resource I like to think of is IMSLP.org, which is a collection of all of these out-of-print classical music scores. And you can just go on there and start clicking on random scores, and there are, thousands, and it's free, and it's legal too. And you just go on there, click, and start clicking on scores, and start just reading through them as slowly as you need to, but just start reading through them. And it will take a while. And man, if you already know how to play an instrument and you didn't know how to read before and you're trying to learn how to read, it's going to be incredibly demoralizing, because it's going to be kind of like you're playing music from scratch or learning from scratch. Learning how to read is a skill that takes a long time. But with enough determination and being able to do it over and over again with new pieces of music, like from imslp.org, you will be able to learn how to read. It just takes a lot of time, a lot of dedicated time just to reading the music. There's no secret to that. You just read the music on the page, and eventually, if you do it enough, you will get better at it.
I really like your channel, but don't touch my tabs!
I don't intend to.
I think it could be useful for stringed instruments. You can indicate the right or easiest fingering. A piano has one key per note, but you can play the same note on different places of the neck with a bass. I don't know if it really matters, though.
You can definitely do that in standard notation. All you need to do is just write Sul A above whatever note, and that's the classical notation for on the A string. Or you could just write above whatever note, A string. Bam, you got it. And that's the nice thing about standard notation, is it's been around for 1,000 years because it's so infinitely malleable. You can just adapt it to whatever situation you have. Like if you need to show that something is on a string, you just write that string above it.
+1 for allegedly. Your voice sounds very clear. Nice use of the phonetic alphabet. That was awesome. I know you're talking about professional tab use in general, but when it comes to pieces that depend very much on a particular way of playing it, would you tab it out? Stuff like Xander Zahn's bass solos.
Maybe, although I don't know. Yeah, for a lot of things, like with Xander Zahn's solo arrangements, yeah, I guess a lot of people might like to look at the tab a little bit better. But I'm not sure if that's in the end game going to be more efficient, because you can simply split a bass part into a treble clef and a bass clef, and you can read it more or less the same way that a piano player reads right and left hand at the same time. It just takes a little bit more time to get used to than tab if you've been reading tab for forever, and if you haven't been reading standard notation forever, but it can be done.
I think if standard notation were in color, example, C note green, this would be even more effective and effortless.
That's an interesting idea, but it will really piss off all of the synesthetes out there. Synesthesia is the pairing of unrelated senses. And I have mild synesthesia. I have something called grapheme-based synesthesia, which basically means that I pair letters and musical notes to colors. It's just like an unconscious sort of pairing between the two. So if I saw C being green, that would be like, what the hell is that? Because for me, C is yellow, A is red, F is green, etc. They're, different color pairings. And the thing is with synesthesia, different people have different color association. So I couldn't use that. It would just like make me tense up. Ugh, it'd be really weird. But it is an interesting idea. Maybe. I don't know.
Pretty straightforward question based on something you mentioned here, and I apologize if you answered this elsewhere. What are your preferred amp sims? I'm exploring recording bass in a home studio, and I wanted to pick your brain.
I've been using Guitar Rig for a while, and it's done the trick for me. I really like it. One that I really want to check out is, of course, Positive Grid's Bias. The desktop version I haven't really used. I've used the iPad version, and the iPad version sounds amazing if you consider how much less computing power the iPad has versus, a computer. Otherwise, Guitar Rig is a just great all-around tool.
Hey Adam, ever heard of modern progressive metal, also referred to as gent nowadays? If you're into polyrhythms and odd time sig, you'll love it. Bands like Animals as Leaders, Pliny, Tesseract, Periphery, Intervals are great to start with, winky face.
Of course I know those bands. I really like Animals as Leaders. In 2009, immediately after graduating Berkeley, I returned home to my parents' house in the Washington, D.C. area, and I was sitting in a jam session in Washington, D.C., and, I was playing the jazz club and whatever, and afterwards we're like hanging out, and Tosin Abasi happened to be there, but this is before anybody knew what Animals as Leaders was, and, we're talking and whatever. It's like, oh, who are you? It's like, oh, I'm a, guitar player, I play 8-string guitar. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, we should jam sometimes. Like, yeah, how musicians say that to one another. No, I never jammed with Tosin Abasi, but, I was hanging out with him for a second before he was famous, and I have this picture to prove it. You can't really tell that it's me in the background, but that's definitely Tosin Abasi in the background, so there we go. Anyway, I like Animals as Leaders. They're awesome.
Speaking of intimidating, Jacob Collier, does he intimidate you? The guy plays almost everything and at a high level. Starting to wonder if the guy is human. Anyway, great videos, though try as I might, I hardly understand some of the stuff you're saying. Cheers!
No, Jacob Collier does not intimidate me. That's actually something going back to what I was talking about, ego in Berkeley. When you see somebody who is so much better than you, or just like on a different level, if you have a lot of ego of yourself as the great musician, you're going to be intimidated and you're going to get angry or tense or anxious when you see somebody of like a great ability who is younger than you. That's what you want to get rid of. You want to get rid of your ego. You want to simply see somebody and get inspired by them, get excited by what they're doing because they're doing something pretty damn cool. So I'm very excited to follow his career. And see what he does next because he is incredibly talented. And no, he definitely does not intimidate me.
Dude, that took me back to my musicology classes. I remember seeing some of my music theory teachers watching me with big wide eyes when I played jazz or pop tune on the piano with parallel fifths and octaves in the left hand, dominant 7, sharp 9, and sharp 13 chords. That
doesn't exist, by the way. I'm just letting you know sharp 13 doesn't exist.
Maybe that's also because I'm a drummer.
Oh, that explains it.
Yeah, parallel fifths, man. Jazz would not work without them. Actually, there's a really awesome article that I recently read by Ethan Iverson, who's the piano player for the Bad Plus. He has this awesome blog called Do the Math. And this recent article he wrote talked about Red Garland, jazz pianist who was famous for playing in a particular way with his right hand, where he was basically playing in all parallel perfect fifths, and he called it Red's bells. It's like a bell sound almost, and it sounds really cool. And there's so many cool things that you can do when you break out of classical aesthetics.
Your video format is shockingly familiar to Idea Channel, lol.
Yeah, I've unashamedly stolen a lot from Idea Channel, among other channels. I don't come from any sort of film background, any sort of photography background, any sort of media background. I'm a freaking musician who has a camera and some editing software. So I'm just gonna take whatever somebody else did and just take that format and make it mine because I don't have time to like worry about anything else. So I'm stealing everybody else's stuff, making it my own, but that's the way of the world. That's what musicians do. That's what you should do too. If you like the format of these videos, please steal them. Please do something more with them because it's always exciting to see how things grow. You're always standing on the shoulders of people who come before. And yeah, I guess I'm standing on the shoulders of the people over at Idea Channel. There we go.